Vladimir. Um, Subject matter for tonight: defunding the gangs of New York and the race paradigm weapon system. Actually, there's so much that we can go into, and there's so many reference points that most people need to put these things in perspective, all of which we cannot go over like in one lecture. And any one of these subdivisional subject matters can take up actually hours of actually study. So I'm going to give you some reference points that I would suggest that you read on your own so that what we're going to talk about tonight can be put in perspective. I want to start off by saying this. The perspective that is given in the constructive history, or what is known as reconstructed history, in relationship to the early 19th century operations in New Amsterdam, in Amsterdam actually, which is called New York now, etc., is usually given from the perspective of the hybrid Europeans battling with each other for jobs and positions in society, etc., being immigrants coming to Morocco, which generally is referred to as America, etc. However, the scholars know that the concepts that are given are totally misdirected and, for the most part, one-sided, and also to create a narrative that's circumstantial of hybrid Europeans competing with each other without telling the real truth that they were actually imposing the continued paradigm of colonization and stealing the land from the Moors, the Aboriginal peoples of the land, who have been tagged Negro, Black, Colored, and Indian, etc. So some of these things I'm going to hit on so that you can do some research for yourself to put these things in perspective. Now, these things need to be grounded in your basic reference point base to understand a lot of the politics operating at North America. Number one, the Spanish Inquisition must be comprehended as operative at and on the lands of North America, particularly, and then exported around the globe, although the most immediate areas would be South Amexem, known as South America, Central Amexem, known as Central America, etc., and the islands, etc. So look at these things and do research on the Organic Act of Congress, 1871. That's important because you have to put in perspective motive. Most of what we're going to be talking about is actual and real motive of operations, distinguished from the party line, storyline that has been told about the gangs of New York in the early 19th century, and with the hybrid people of Irish and the hybrids of Italia and others coming to North America, etc. And keep in mind, this must be recognized in your mind, and you must keep this in perspective at all times. They are immigrants, they're not Americans. Get that through your head. Because one of the things that they've been misrepresenting in the history is claiming to be Americans. This diverts people from the actual operations that were taking place, and that is colonial operations and them stealing and cribbing the land under the Pope's operations of the doctrine of discovery. And so they emphasize the hybrid Europeans battling with each other for jobs and positions, etc., in the swamplands of Amsterdam, which is called now New York, because they changed the maps too. You got to know that. And many of the Aboriginal people who were in the area, they were running out, and so they really turned the history around and refer to the Aboriginal people as slaves, when actually it's reversed. Slave is actually derived from Slovakian, and it actually deals with the hybrid Europeans, or what is known as the Paleolith of the species, hybrid Europeans. The other thing that you need to look at is St. Patrick's Day that they celebrate in Ireland. And St. Patrick's Day has relationship to actually them killing off the Picts, the Dubs, and the Mores, who are the true Europeans, which is Moors, etc. And in doing so, their celebration is called St. Patrick's Day. Amongst Africans, it's known as Tag Day. For the people who are looking at the gangs of New York, their operations past and present, and also the race paradigm as a weapon, you need to be grounded in one of the hybrid German naturalists, taxidermist known as Carl Linnaeus. And you're dealing around 1735, and he's dealing with works of actually a couple of other German naturalists before himself. However, he dealt with constructing the view of what is known as the phenotypes of humanity to divide the human family, mainly because they were in the process of claiming to be Americans. And it also comes from the pattern of a lot of the hybrid Europeans claiming to be Jews while they're not Jews, which is a makeup or a cover up of the Sabian Moors culture, or the Gnostic culture of Hermetic law and Hermetic culture, which you know as Sabbath or Sabbath, etc. And of course, the seven. All of this goes back to, say, Nubia, Sudan, Eritrea, collectively Phoenicia, Egypt. So when you're talking Phoenicians and Egypt, you're simply talking the Asiatic African culture collectively, actually, and not so much as the geographical or jurisdictional lines that have been presented to the world in the Mappa Mundi operations of reconstructed history and constructed history that the people get. And so what you have essentially that has been going on the planet is the hybrid Europeans writing themselves into history of Asia and Africa, and then trying to separate the Asians and Africans from their Hikupta origin history, etc. Hikupta, you would be known as Egypt. So they're trying to separate mentally you from Egypt, etc., which is also here. So this has necessitated them reconstructing history. And it, on the surface, most people would think, so what does the gangs of New York have to do with that? You know, what you have actually as the gangs of New York, and this must be very, very clear to you, that the hybrid Europeans that that were notoriously known as the gangs of New York, and they have multiple gangs, etc., were hired actually by the United States Corporation Trading Company, which was also in, the owners were also in the process of reconstructing history to promote their corporation as a country, which is the concept that most people have now. So there's a concept of people not really understanding that the United States is not a country, just like the hybrid Europeans are not Americans. Same thing. And just like the hybrid Europeans claim to be Jews are not Jews. The same paradigm is there. Now, the concept that the people have is that the gangs of New York are unfortunate poor European hybrid Paleoliths who come to America that are struggling. Some of that is true, yes. However, what they're not telling the people is that many of them came only under the auspices of trading, of trade routes, and many of them would be sponsored with jobs, etc., to come to North America because trading has always been going between Asia and the Maghreb, which is actually Morocco, which is North America, for actually centuries. And so many of them are actually indentured, have indentured contracts, whereas they would pay for their travels because they actually had nothing. And so a lot of this corruption of what has become slavery has its origin in that too. And so when they're talking about slavery operating at North America, they will misrepresent it as being the Aboriginal people or people of Asiatic African descent put into servitude, when that's not exactly true. It's actually kind of like reverse. Most of your slaves were both hybrid Europeans and Pict and More Asiatics, people of the land and people of other parts of the world, etc. And many of your Asiatics who have been designated in history slaves were actually taken from North America to other parts of the world, as opposed to reverse. So even the so-called slave diaspora type thing that they've been telling you is actually a fraud, truthfully. But all of its nature is to disconnect the people from the land. This must be very, very clear. And those of you who have pens, write this down, because this is very important. The gangs of New York having a construct of hybrid Europeans who went under contract to help destabilize and wage war subtly against the Aboriginal people so they could steal New York area. This is dealing with the 5-point star, and which is the Venus star, which is also the swastika, which is ours. This must be known. This is why all of those things are giving a negative. And so they'll talk about the gangs of New York and talk about the 5 points of the streets that interjected or intersected in that area near the point of where you have now, where they dropped them buildings and said that some Muslims did it with box knives from Afghanistan, and they dropped them buildings in New York, which everybody and their dog knows is a lie. But it's ongoing Inquisition war, etc. Is really the 5-pointed star, which is Venus, etc., which is the star of the Moors, which is the green star and the red flag, which is also known as defrocking or pulling down the sovereignty of Morocco, or commonly known as chopping down the cherry tree. It's just that's a code word for removing the people. Now, the gangs of New York, they organized into a military, commercial mercenary force. Write this down. Militarized, commercial, mercenary force and contractors. So the gangs of New York became contracted for the United States subdivision corporate operatives and for the governors of the different corporate states of the United States to do their dirty work of clearing the land of Moors, who they tag as blacks and Indians, etc. And much of that focus took place on Manhattan. Manhattan is now called Manhattan, and Harlem, etc. And of course, these patterns have been going on like ever since they've been here, including them bombing Tulsa, Oklahoma, bombing Columbus, Ohio, Greensville, North Carolina, etc. And the game that they have interjected into the narrative to cover this up is an adaptation from the phenotype system set up by Carlos Linnaeus of 1735, and recently, in recent decades, in around 1977, in that area, they interjected some of the code systems into the census, the U.S. Census, I think under Title 15, to get these people to tag themselves to agree to be Negro, Black, or colored, etc., people of color, which the people don't know actually takes them out of international law protections and also out of the rule, the universal rule of descendability, because no such people exist, etc. At the same time, it removes legally, not lawfully, their obligations to the treaties and to the Constitution, because the treaties between Britain and Morocco, etc., concerning the Aboriginal people here at North America is with Moors. It's not with Negroes, Blacks, and coloreds and coons. And also coon is also a corruption of kun, etc. This has to do with Moors and Turks. There's another way of hiding Moorish history. So they say kun as a slur, which is actually kun. And that's in Asiatic African linguistic form, referencing Moors and Turks, etc., which is really still Moors. So Carlos Linnaeus, around 1735, when he used the phenotype structure, they used that to further perpetrate the caste system and also the color code system, also to disengage or to disenfranchise the people from the land and from their estates. So the gangs of New York, being mercenary commercial mercenaries for the United States Corporation Company, whereas the governors and the mayors, etc., would send them out to neutralize resistant peoples. As an example, like say if they wanted farmland or some of the prime land areas and houses in Amsterdam, which is now called New York, they would send them out as policing, or what you call patrolling the area, looking for Moors to either kill or to steal from and to steal their property. This is why you will see all of the deed systems that are operating in actually in North America and the United States are all late, very late 1800s and early 1900s. Before that, they didn't even exist in the concept that they've been presenting to the people. And so people think that the gangs of New York are men of law, when actually they were some of the most notorious criminal gangs that ever existed in any place at North America. So that organized body of hybrid European commercial mercenaries made agreements with the United States Corporation Company, and they started buying them uniforms, and they became what you know now today as the Fraternal Order of Police. And so the people who really don't know the origin of these people and have a very confused idea of what their real mission is, will often look at things that they do with sheer surprise and awe, and say, how could they do this to that little girl? How could they kill that little girl for stealing 14 cents and actually executing her? And how could they kill this innocent man that was walking down the street in his own neighborhood because some European looked at him and said they didn't like him? And how could they go all around and drown these women and take their estates and give it to the church? calling them witches. And how could they literally choke that man in the street for doing nothing, and nobody does anything because they're commercial mercenaries. And the people really don't understand that because they think that they are law officers. They are not law officers. They are militarized commercial mercenaries under contract for the United States Corporation Company, the mayors and the governors of the corporate states to destabilize targeted neighborhoods. Does it mean that every person who says they're a policeman or a policewoman is operating with that mentality? No, it does not mean that. Though most of them know that what they're really contracted to do. And I would suggest to you to do some research and see if you ever hear any so-called Gang of New York member known as Fraternal Order of Police talk about constitutional rights of anybody. And if they do, more than likely they'll get fired because that's not what their job is. Also, you want to do some research and recognize that all court cases in relationship to people bringing charges against so-called policemen, 90% of them fail. And it confuses the people. And the politicians and the assigned leader guys that are put in the communities are charged with arguing the Carlos Linnaeus Foundation operations, which is known as race, distinguished from nationality. I'm going to repeat, race distinguished from nationality. If you deal with nationality now, you're dealing with international law, you're dealing with treaties, and you're dealing with constitutional principles. So they disguise the truth of the rights of the people and convert them into privileges under corporate operations, which most of you already know is why they constructed, covered up the original Article of Amendment 13 with its 20 sections and interjected under a colorable operation, never ratified, no constitutional convention, constructed what is known as the 14th Amendment, also to continue the doctrine of discovery of raping the people of their land and their estates. The gangs of New York's job was to go out into the community upon assignment by the mayors and the so-called councilmen of the different corporate tax assessment programs, etc., and kill off any of the Moors, who some of whom agreed to be Indians, who were resisting or teaching the people anything relative to the real history of what was actually going on. And so their job was to make sure that whenever there was any serious issue or complaint, that they would start talking about race and skin color and not talk about nationality. And this is actually a diversion. Now, the concept that is presented to the people under the guise of the General Education Board of John D. Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates is to convince the people that the Carlos Linnaeus phenotype operations is a propagation of the truth of the origin of the human family as derived from and coming down from ancient Asia and Africa, having what would be considered a solid historical and established rule foundation, when in fact it does not. When actually it's a political construct for caste system construction. And so you look at 1735. So once you go beyond Carlos Linnaeus, the race paradigm that has been promoted around the world in these contemporary times did not exist. I repeat, before the 1735 operations of Carlos Linnaeus, the taxidermist, hybrid European German, dealing with backing up the caste system under the doctrine of discovery because they've been stealing our land and our estates, etc. Before 1735, the race paradigm that everybody's arguing about today did not exist. Now, the concept is as soon as they start doing their culling operations, and culling is that's C-U-L-L-I-N-G. That's sort of like a modest word to say killing off the people. Rather than say genociding the people, they'll say culling. They'll say population control or birth control. Things like that. So when you deal with Margaret Sanger, in the birth control thing, when you're dealing with Black Lives Matter operations of, say, George Soros in connection with who's the guy that patented the coronavirus? Gates. Yes. And so the people don't know that these are biological warfare tools that actually have patents on them. And to keep the people from paying attention that the people who they thought was their government is actually waging war on you, the race argument is presented to divert you from the actual operations, which is the doctrine of discovery, which the Pope of Rome had promised that they had stopped. And also the Organic Act of Congress and the set up of the Treasury bond system for the United States Corporation Company, etc., was after 1861, after they got rid of Abraham Lincoln, which it is known by all politicians, and you must write this down so you can put things in perspective. Abraham Lincoln, this is not to support him or to condemn him one way or another. It is only to tell you the truth of the history. Was the last lawful president for the United States Republic platform operating under treaty and constitution. All praetors or presidents after Abraham Lincoln were operatives under the demo system of the KKK, whether they claim to be Republican or Democrat, operating and enforcing the doctrine of discovery under the Jesuit order and the Popes of Rome, with the distinct operative intent to slowly kill off the Moors, the Aboriginal people of the land, tag Negro, Black, Colored, and Indian, etc., and steal the land, and then claim the land, and then claim the sovereign power of the people by claiming to be Americans. And so when you look at the gangs of New York, one of their military operations and protocols is to patrol the streets of the Aboriginal people and systematically, every once in a while, do what they call a ritual sacrifice. This is where they'll kill a man or woman. 90% of the time, they will be unarmed, and they will gang them just like wolves, because they're the gangs of New York, and literally murder them in front of the people to intimidate the people, to to keep that traumatic shock mentality in the people to be subdued. That's the job of the gangs of New York. So the people who you've been calling police officers, they're not officers because they're not constitutionally sanctioned. The constitutional sanction was the sheriffs. And what they've done is killed off the sheriffs and would put in members of the gangs of New York to take the job of the sheriff and make sure that the constitutions and the treaties were never acknowledged. They know them, they're obligated to take oaths, but they never enforce them. And so the gangs of New York, military operations, commercial mercenaries, pretending to be law officers, whose job is to keep our communities destabilized. It does not mean, again, that all people who work for them have that intent. However, that is their charge. And when they stop doing that, also when they stop imposing what are known internationally as international foreign bills of exchange. How many of you right now, if I say to you, foreign bill of exchange, how many people would know what that actually is? Which is a feudal law, unconstitutional process, whereas a highwayman and the persons that you've been calling policemen are also known as highwaymen. Their job was to go around on the highways and the roads robbing people. And if you look at all Supreme Court cases in relationship to violations by those persons called policemen, they will also be termed as highwaymen. And that's a fact. Now, because the people don't know the real history, their concepts of how to look at these people are wrong. Their concepts of how to deal with these people are wrong. Their concepts of what they should be doing themselves within their own communities relative to treaties and constitutions have been wrong and absent. And they've been marching around, praying around, frustrating themselves and their offspring, and also out of frustration, doing things that are basically, in many instances, unlawful and not in their own interest because they have no due process. Not doing things that are basically they have no due process, not knowing that the due process was violated when they agreed to be race or distinguished from nationality, because the nationalities come under constitutions and treaties, and race does not. It is a political paradigm that has been weaponized and is actually being enforced now. Now,